Thank you so much, Amanda and Salome, for joining us right on time. Thank you so much, Jumoke, also for joining right on time. So I'll start with the introduction. I like to give a bit of backstory about our speakers. So I'll just bring up the slides. So first of all, thank you again for coming. Today's focus is really about managing complex behavior. I'm sure our professionals will tell us exactly what complex behavior means because that means different things to different people. Traveling beyond the label is a community for parents and families raising neurodivergent children, and that's the essence of why we're here. We try to have a focus for each month, and the focus for this month is managing behavior because most of the children within our community fall within the age range of 3 to about 10. Majority fall within that age range. So it's really great to have you here. So we have two speakers. We have one, Salome, on the left, who is based in Nigeria. Salome is a dedicated SEN therapist and she's doing wonderful things in a very interesting part of Nigeria, the north. For me, I was so excited to come across her profile because if for anyone who knows about Nigeria, Lagos is kind of like the bubbly side of it. Abuja is the bubbly side of it as well. But for me to hear that she's doing some wonderful things in some northern parts of the country, including Gombe, I was really excited. So she's very passionate about sharing her knowledge. She works with educators, she works with families. She has a background in special education and clinical psychology. So she's very passionate about this topic, behavior. Then Amanda, on the other hand, she's a teacher. She teaches within a special school. And I think her bio says it all. You know, she's passionate about teaching. She has worked her way up the ranks, from her when she started, teaching, and she has the special school she's supporting includes children with a range of needs covering autism, PDA, and ADHD. And Amanda is a believer just like myself. And to give you a bit of backstory, I'm sure everyone that will see this or watch the video later on would be able to read up on their profile. But behavior is something I was saying to them just before people started joining that behavior is definitely something we have been trying to really nail for a while now. And we've not been able to be successful in getting a behavioral therapist. That was all we're focusing on. Then I was like, we're parents now. We don't really want theory. We want people that are neck deep in this. And that was when the thought of, okay, like, why don't I reach out to people that actually work in schools? And I reached out to Salome first, and she was so, even before she got all the details, she was so excited to join in, and so keen, to be part of this as well. And fast forward a few weeks, or should I say a few weeks after I discussed with Salome, I had a very interesting experience with Amanda because both my sons, like are on the spectrum. And one of the things I've been trying to do with them is to integrate them into church and things like that. So I started visiting a church called C3 in Cambridge. And we had a very interesting first day when I brought my second son, and the way Amanda just handled the whole situation, very calm, met with me. Within how many days she had produced a social story, I was like, wow, these people are really serious about what they are doing. And I now also, now me being forward, I now decided to share what we are doing here, and she jumped on it without even batting an eyelid. And for me, I just know that we are in for a treat. So that's the backstory. So we're just going to go straight into the questions. I'm hoping more people will join. I don't know what's going on. Maybe they've forgotten, but I'm sure they will join or watch the video after on. So I have a few set of questions for both Amanda and Salome. And after those questions, we'll open it up for the audience. So the first set of question is about just to break the ice. And I'll start the conversation with Salome. So, based on your experience, what would you say are the first of all, maybe we should define what we mean by complex behavior. Thank you for joy. Is there any? Okay, yes, it's your. So, maybe we should define what we mean by complex behavior, so that in your experience, what would you say are the complex behaviors that you have observed in neurodivergent children, Salome?
Okay, thank you very much for having me. You've said it all. Thank you for everything. All right, so quickly, just briefly, because I know that we have very, very limited time. So when we talk about complex behavior, basically there are behaviors such as aggression, meltdowns, withdrawals, and then sometimes this can be as a result of lack of communication, children who are non-verbal or very have very, very limited vocabulary. And the other factors as well, but then as time goes by, we're going to explain more because I believe that when you throw in certain questions, we'll get to elaborate better and then
Good.
we'll take up from
That's
there.
good. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. So, Amanda, just along the similar veins, what will you say are she has already kind of cited some, in your own view and in your own experience, what are the common underlying reasons behind this behavior, especially in neurodivergent children, based on your own experience?
Yeah, so common reasons. I think Salome has mentioned one and some others. So she mentioned communication difficulties. That's a major one. Because again, some children have limited vocabulary. Actually, some children have enough words in their vocabulary bank to converse, but then it could be emotional regulation difficulties. That can be spurred on from many things in the environment, noises, lights,
Mm,
crowds, smells, lots of different reasons. Can make children feel anxious, can make them start to present these sorts of behaviors like head banging and it could be self-harming, throwing objects because of those reasons.
Thank you so much for that. So, I'm sure that from everyone listening, the whole way you can never really exhaust the reasons behind this, but I think that
Yeah.
gives us a good start. So just going into the next set of questions, just in anticipation of more people joining and more questions coming. How can we distinguish between, because you mentioned communication difficulties, this is to you, Salome. How do you think we can distinguish between behavioral challenges and sensory overload or even communication difficulties? Because my understanding is if you are able to have a distinction, then you know how to address it. So as parents, do you think there's a way we can distinguish between this?
Yes, there we have different ways we can distinguish this, but then the truth about this is you need to understand why.
Mm,
Understanding why such behavior is occurring is one major factor. If you have a reason why, then you should be able to have answers to such behaviors happening.
mm,
Yes. So once you're able to understand why that in applied behavior analysis is being called the antecedents
mm-hmm,
or sometimes yes the why, because when we say the antecedent in some cases is what happened before that behavior occurred, but then at the same time it could also be why the behavior occurred, which is
mm,
basically answering the same question
mm-hmm,
in code. So when we talk about sensory overload, sometimes it might look like sudden meltdowns. Sometimes the child might decide to say to cover. There's going to be lots of covering of ears, refusing touch, running away, and then in some cases it happens in public environments, in schools where there's so much noise, and sometimes even in the home it happens because we parents sometimes make the mistakes of always giving instructions without letting the child process these questions. So most times when I work with parents and then I try to make them observe if it's a sensory overload or there's actually a behavioral challenge, what I do is I tell them once you give an instruction, you count to 10 gradually, either in your mind or you can count out loud, but then it shouldn't be something that will distract the child so that the child finds time to be able to process it. It shouldn't come in as a sensory overload for the child, you know. So it can also be common in markets because of the noise and so on, and also in churches. Of course, not everybody really understands that Sometimes the noise might be too much,
Mm,
and then it might lead to one complex behavior to another. And
mm,
then when we talk about communication, when we talk about behavioral challenges, we could also talk about, we could say that the child usually have um, an unintentional or unpatterned nature.
mm.
These things happen because they are not intentional. They can, it is not like it is planned. It happens sometimes as a result of what is happening in the environment as well. And then communication difficulties might also cause frustrations for the child, can lead to aggression as well. And then sometimes the child will not be able to express his or her needs based on communication difficulties as well.
Good. Okay. Do you have anything to add to that, Amanda?
Yeah.
Tips of how parents can maybe distinguish between behavioral
Well, I think
challenges?
Salome has summarised it so well. I have my notes and everything she said is on here. I think
Mm,
it's important to realise when we're talking about communication difficulties, there's two areas. There is the expressive and the receptive. So receptive being the understanding,
Yes.
and expressive, of course, being able to use the right words to say what they want and need. So I was just thinking when you said about frustration, I can remember I lost my voice. Due to a cold, when you've just lost your voice and for a whole week, and I still went into work and I was relying on my TAs to speak for me, and I found it really frustrating. And to the end, because I do Makaton signing with my class, I was like starting to do the signing just to help me get, the message across, to which went really well. And I was really proud of them. But yeah, definitely communication difficulties can be highly frustrating. And it's always about giving a child a voice. Now, um, so I've had some children do things like pull their trousers down, when actually what they wanted to communicate was that they needed to go to the toilet. So sometimes the way they are trying to communicate through body language, facial expressions, nonverbal means of communication may not be socially acceptable. So it's about also looking at how, like you said, you look for the triggers and you try to, as a team, determine if there's a pattern. Is it a person? Is it a place? What's happening for this child in this moment? And then really what you're trying to do is reduce those triggers or give the child an appropriate way of communicating. So for that child, you might use symbols, which they can either use as a PEX form of communication, which stands for picture exchange symbols, or they point. So they can either give you the symbol or they can point to one of the communication boards to express if they cannot use their words. If they're Makaton signing, you would do the sign for toilets like this, and you would encourage modeling, saying the word and try and encourage them. So with all of this, it's not an overnight fix, but it's consistency and it's making sure everyone around the child knows what communication aids to use and to not put too many out at one time, because it's about the quality, not the quantity. And it's about making sure, even if it was a simple toilet, that they would be able to use that with any adult, and also that they would be able to use it in any context, because you're trying to get away from this rote style of learning. So I think that's quite important. With sensory overload, we'd be usually in the classroom, we look for things like we always have to do a check, like is the environment too cluttered? Is there things out or stuck on the walls that just don't need to be there? What is it that the child actually needs in that environment, and what affects them is again comes through observations. But as Salome said, you'd get all the ears being covered, eyes being covered. You'd start to see some children get high anxiety, and it can look very different for different children. I've seen proper sweats and hyperventilation, and freezing, and then I've seen the child sort of take a breath and then just try to run towards someone as if they're about to barge someone. So every child has a different pattern in how they're that behavior may come out, but actually it's all part of communicating. That's what we see behavior as a form of communication. So, and then once you identify what the triggers are, you can put things in place to reduce that. So, for example, if a child, let's say a child with autism, doesn't like change, which is quite a common one. We go well above and beyond to try and put social stories in place to let the child know if another adult is helping in class the next day, if we know an adult will be off on a course or an appointment, for example. If we're going on trips, you have social stories at least 2 weeks before. Even with your son Nathan, when he was coming to church, to kids' church, you know, that's why I got onto that quick, because we need that social story, because I was thinking, he's come to this place, he doesn't know people, there's so many children, it's a new environment. So you want to reduce those anxieties as much as possible. And once you've done that, you get a calmer, regulated child. So yeah, I think that's the main thing, is
I
to
mean,
always try to reduce the triggers.
that's great. I mean, in fact, you've just really hit the nail on the head with all of these questions. Please bear with me, the audience. We just wanted to just touch base on some key questions, and we now take questions from the audience. So I just want to go through as much as possible. Just two more questions, then we open it up. We've talked a lot about, you've touched on things like emotion, because one of the previous talks we had was with someone who was teaching us about how to teach our children how to regulate their emotions. So the question is really, what role does emotional regulation play in behavior? And how can we teach it to our children? Bearing in mind that some of our children can use their words, some of them are not yet. I don't like using that word verbal speaking. It's really messes up my head. So yeah, bearing in mind that some of our children are still learning to speak and things like that, how can we really teach them to communicate their emotions? So maybe we'll just start with you, Salome, then Amanda can just chip in.
Okay, so for me, I take emotional regulation as the heart of behavior management itself, because even as neurotypical individuals, we should be able to know how to regulate our emotions. And then, if there is no emotional regulation taking place, then there's going to be a lot of things happening with the individual. Then when we move to the neurodivergent children, you find out that it's a bit difficult for them. So teaching them how to manage their emotions is one thing. That's why I pick it as the heart, because it answers everything. It can tell when you're happy, when you're sad, when you're frustrated, and so on and so forth. So being able to teach these children, or to being able to teach children how to manage their emotions, is one thing. And then one thing I take to do most times is modeling these techniques. But then I don't just model, I have to have like a flashcard, maybe like a wheel, an emotional regulation wheel, or the AAC. But then in some schools, it's very, very limited. And then because I visit schools, I just have to just improvise what I have in my pack, in my kit, so that I'll be able to meet the needs of these children. And one thing that has worked for me is the use of social stories. If parents are able to understand that the use of social stories is one major thing, it's one major way to help children regulate their emotions, by identifying these emotions, then it is something for parents. Because aside the fact that you teach them how to label, or how to model these emotions, or how to identify these emotions, you should be able to also tell them how to use these emotions. Identifying is one thing, and then teaching them how to is through social stories, because it has been based on research and so on and so forth. It has been something that has been very, very effective. Then I also preach to parents to also like create a calm corner in their homes, because the truth is, we as parents, we want to We want everything to go smooth. I know that it's not a smooth ride, but then we don't sometimes want to take instructions from the professionals when they give it. But the truth is, when they tell you to do something, just try and do it and try to implement, So once you have a calm corner, by the time you model, because modeling takes place in different ways, you model the emotions, you model they're being how they're being expressed, and then you can also teach the child how to go to the calm corner so that they calm down, and then you could maybe provide a few sensory materials, a few sensory kits like the fidget ball and so on and so forth, so that the child is able to use it. But then you still have to teach. So the thing is, one thing is showing the child, and then another thing is teaching the child as well. Yeah.
I,
Let me
I,
not say.
I think you really hit the nail on the head in terms of the two-stage approach. I'm keen to hear what Amanda has to add on this.
Well, it's the same. I could just say that some other things that we use. So when you're teaching children, first it's they need to be able to recognize the different emotions. So we can use lots of stories. It depends on the age of the child, which story you use. And then you can have lots of activities such as, you could play snap with matching emotional faces. It doesn't have to be, it could be pictures of actual faces, or it could be if the child was interested in, there's the different cartoons, you can actually use that as a way of highly motivating them to come. So I have a few children who like different Disney characters, so you can do that. And then once the child has a solid understanding of the different emotions, it's about recognizing it in themselves. So in the context, if they are feeling sad, you would then say to the child, I can see X is sad. And then, that you could say, how are you feeling? And hopefully they will say sad. So because it can be a little bit confusing, ones like if they feel worried or excited, a little bit similar feelings, or how do you actually differentiate that? So I think it's really important in context that you say to the child and model what the actual feeling that they're showing looks like, and then that they can say it for themselves. And then obviously that moves on to looking at others as well. So if someone else is crying and screaming or throwing to someone is angry, you're constantly modeling the use of emotional language. And once children have got that basis of understanding, it, like Salome said, it would be about, well, what do I do when I feel that way? So what we do is sometimes we have to explicitly teach the children what are acceptable behaviours and what are not. So they can do sorting activities. And what I've done for my class is it will say something like, it's okay to feel angry, but it's not okay to, it might be hurt someone. So if I feel angry, I can, and it has different pictures that they choose. That might be take out a therapy ball, that might say go for a walk, that might say I need a vibrating snake on my shoulders. Whatever it is that the child has chosen, we get them to choose the things that they think would work for them, and then when it happens, we take down that visual and we give it to them to choose, and then we put it into practice, so that over time, hopefully, they can just, when they feel they're angry or whatever they're feeling, they can take the resources that they need. So it's always about building independence and confidence to be able to do things themselves. So we, as much as they need support by the adults, or we really try to avoid a dependency culture, because actually when they move on, who will they, you could argue, who will they have? Well, they may have someone, but for how long? So it's really, really important, I stress, to always encourage the children to be independent in their choices as much as possible. We also do things like distraction is a big one, which is why I always ask the parents, always talk to the parents about what the child likes and is interested in, because as soon as it might be something you're leading or want the child to do, we know that sometimes the children like to follow their own agenda. So obviously in a school context, that's not that shouldn't happen to the extent that they do no learning. There is an element of choosing and following their interests, absolutely, but we challenge and move them on. So I'm very interested in talking to parents about what the child is interested in, so that if we do have any presentations of how they're feeling, we can offer that as part of, if I'm feeling so and so, I can do this. So that's what we do as well.
I mean, that's just perfect. Maybe we'll just change the tone of it while we're waiting for Salome to come back.
Mm.
So you talked a lot about hearing from parents. Parents have really been beaten by the educational system. A lot of parents have very varied experiences about the schools their children have been, and some have been able to recover from it, from bad experiences, but some people are still on the process and the journey of trying to trust, the professionals that are working with their kids. So what advice will you give to parents when they are having a challenging time getting
Mm.
the support from their child's school, because both of you are teachers? I think
Mm.
I really want to hear from you what you think parents can do if they feel like they are unsupported, or they are being misunderstood, or they feel like their children's behavior is just not properly managed in school. What
Mm.
what can parents do in this situation?
Is Salome not there? Do you want me to
Yeah,
go?
you go ahead, yeah, because she's trying
Okay.
to, I don't know what goes happening with her connection.
I mean, so I went to the SEN conference a couple of weeks ago, and it's so important that parents meet with other parents. So there are forums like SEN conferences, even events like what you're doing in Eniola. It's so important to um, connect with the groups that are actually trying to get more support out there for parents, and a chance to ask questions like, what you've done now. See a question come through. I'll answer that in a minute.
We will
So
go to that question once you're done. Yeah.
yeah, okay. I saw it just pop up. Yeah, so definitely connecting with parents as much as possible as you can, and getting the word out and sharing. Even this go beyond the label, like sharing it on social media, sharing it with your friends, and so that's a great start. So thank you, for all that you're doing, because I also have a heart cry to support parents. Definitely in the schools, every school should have a Senko. So it's really important that you are offered time to speak with a Senko. I know that annual reviews, if a child has an educational healthcare plan, short version EHCP, that there are annual reviews that take place. I know it is more difficult if a child does not have an EHCP, because of the way the system works, which I cannot change. It is the way that system works, but I know there are local groups that the school should be able to provide the parent with. It all depends on which location you're in, but there are local parenting groups and support to get more understanding about children with SEND, and it's just about asking as well. So in the first instance, those are the places to go to.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, so we'll just switch it now since we have some questions in the chat.
Okay.
So the first
Let's
question
see.
says, is there a social story app that you can recommend?
So I've never looked at a social story app, but Gina Davies is the one who does the social stories. And if you look at her on the website, there are lots of information. That's where I learned how to do social stories. So you can look that up. At what stage does a child use AAC? So you have got
Sorry, what's the name of the person so that we can, did you say,
so hold on, let
if you
me
can just
I
type
can
it
type
in
it
the, yeah.
in. Hold on. One moment.
I think there are
Okay.
some tools like widgets. I came
Yes.
across a tool like called widgets.
Oh,
Widgets.
sorry. I said Gina Davis, that's Bucket. It's Carol Gray. Sorry.
Okay.
Carol Gray. Yeah.
You
So that's
can.
even on the National Autistic Society.
Okay.
It says social stories. And they deliver training on there that I can see. So
Okay.
Carol Gray with a Gray. I'll put that in the chat. Yeah, sorry, Gina Davis is the lady who does Bucket for Attention and Listening.
Okay.
Um,
Okay. So yeah,
Okay.
there are quite a number of them. Some are free, some are signposted, and sometimes you can just find a template on Etsy that you can just develop. But yeah, I think there are quite a number
Yeah.
coming up. Um,
So this, yeah. Sorry, you're going to read out the second
yeah, the
question.
second question, it says, at what stage does a child use an AAC? Because this has to do with
Mm,
communication.
mm. So that's interesting because in my school we have children right the way from early years age all the way up to secondary, and we use AAC, that's augmentative alternative communication methods, for all of them. It's really about what the child needs. That's what you put in place. So anytime I've spoken to a speech and language therapist, I've always been advised to use paper-based first before high-tech. So you've got low-tech symbols and high-tech symbols. Low-tech are your paper-based symbols, where you will have communication boards. And for children just starting off, you might have 1 to 4 symbols. It all depends on what keywords you want to use. And then once you build up that bank of words, it's just about, I know there are some apps which I'm currently trying to look for at my school. That's what I was picking up from the last SEN conference we went to. Um, so you can put those communication apps onto the iPad, which is really helpful as well. But I know some children have communication folders that go between home and school or wherever they go. Again, if it's PECS, then they have a PECS folder. If it's not PECS, then they have a communication folder as well. And then if it's high-tech AAC, you're looking at, let's just say some children might need eye gaze, or they use their communication on a device because they're at that level where they can they can communicate it, and even with their eyes for children with cerebral palsy, I've used eye gaze with. So yeah, it's not what stage, it's really where is the child at with their level of communication? What words do they know? Have they had an assessment? Yeah.
Okay. Does that answer your question? Or if you want to ask more, feel free to develop it. Because from what I'm hearing from Amanda, I think it's you can start with PECs, then depending on what the child can tolerate, isn't it? Then you move into more
Um,
high techs or
well,
what?
it doesn't have to be PECS. It can be a
Okay,
communication folder. PECS is really
okay,
for if a child does not understand that you are a communicative partner, you would use PECS. And that's, um, children who don't go to the adult to request something, basically. So it's that level, basic level of communication to even
okay.
understand that the adult in the room is there to help you when you need and if you need a request. So that builds up in stages if you're using PECS, and that is to actually just to teach the child to go to the adult, to give them a symbol,
Mm,
to request something. And then that builds up to I want strips and
mm,
the vocabulary increases. Communication boards you could, again, it depends. You can have up to, like I say, 2 to 8, 2 to 4, 2 to 8 symbols. It depends on how many symbols the child can cope with. That's not going to be overwhelming, but that you can start to use in context. So again, that might be, now again, we always use high motivators, and any speech and language therapist has always said, for example, food is a high motivator most of the time, or a favorite toy, or a favorite song. So you can always easily have those symbols to get them to realize that's what they want. So now they're going to have to give it to the adult to get it. Because if they don't, that lunchbox is not coming out of the cupboard unless they need some more support, and the adult will model how to do that, because obviously you need to move things that they're learning on. But again, it's progressive.
she's provided more information. So she said the child is currently on
Yeah.
PECs, but they
Mm,
are moving to grade. So that's
mm,
I know what she means by grade. So she just wanted to be sure that it's the right thing next. Now
mhm,
that so that means that the child already knows how to identify the person that they're speaking to, or I think they don't
mhm,
want to move to the next step where he's probably has a lot more um vocabulary or more things to communicate about,
Mm,
you know.
mm.
So
I
what would
mean,
you say?
from PECS, what we usually do is we move to a communication folder and we start to build up the bank of words. So what that would look like is you have a core board, and those are basically your verbs that you would use in everyday language. And then at the top, we have it has like 10 tabs, if you like, and they would have let's just say one tab says family, and as you turn it over, it's got all the different family members there. And then another tab might be colors or food or activity. And those are your fringe words, which are basically your nouns. Because what you want to do, a lot of professionals will use nouns a lot. So you will realize that children with SEN tend to know a lot of nouns. But actually, let's just say the child is, in year 4, they're learning about volcanoes. Okay, yes, those nouns are important to know, but the argument is how many times would that child use that vocabulary versus knowing the help, I want, I need, whatever verb that is, they need to help get the message across. Um, Basically, there are like your first 100 words that you can use gradually to teach the child so that actually they are able to communicate what they want. And the fringe vocabulary always comes because, like I say, that's the easiest one
Okay.
to say.
I,
Pen,
I
bottle.
I really like this idea about because I'm really big on this AAC because I've seen a lot of children do fantastic things with it in terms of communication. So if the parent is now or the decision has been made to progress using the AAC, is this
Mm.
something that the school would now work with the parent to ensure that there's consistency at home? Is that how it works?
Absolutely. So
Okay.
the school should be a partner with the parent, as in that information is so important to share so that the child, you know, has those means to communicate. Because, for example, the child who I teach Makaton to, if the parents don't know, it's not going to be great for the child. It would be frustrating to be able to do it in one place only, and that puts a ceiling on the child's learning. So, as much as possible, anyone involved with the child should see this folder of Makaton symbols to let them know. But then there can be training provided depending on how much the person is working with the child. So with the parent and the school, they should have these open communications so that if there is breakthrough, oh, X was able to communicate that he wanted a drink today and needed to go to the toilet with 3 different adults. That really needs to come back to the parent because, if that child couldn't do that, that's progress. So then you might also say and plan, well, which symbols can we move on to next? So you don't want to just stay stagnant. You want learning to move on, but you also want to make sure the child can do it at home and at school. And then if it gets to a point where the child has developed so much vocabulary, I would request for speech and language involvement because I think referrals, I mean, in my school, this is how it works. Like the referrals go through the speech and language therapist, and you have to prove all that you've done with paper-based to sort of argue your case as to why they would need high tech, which is the devices. Because actually, I've been told they're the same. It's just some children and how they access the paper versus the pointing or the eye gazing, you see? So just what I'm saying, it's not necessarily that the high tech is any better, but equally, if the child is more motivated by having it on the iPad, that's also an argument for. When we went to the SEN conference, I asked the speech and language therapist there about AAC, and I'll put it in the chat. She said there was a website, I believe it's called Call Scotland, and it has a wheel of lots of different AAC apps that you could try. I don't know which ones are free, which ones you have to pay for, because I'm also looking at and exploring that for myself. But I'll put it in the chat, and you could explore and look and see if any of those would be suitable for your child. Let me just have a look. AAC. Oh, I have it written down. So while I look for that, are there any other
Yeah,
questions?
Salome is having challenges. I don't know.
Mm.
Let me just see. Yes, there's another question.
Mm-hmm.
Bear with me, just from the bank of questions.
That's
This
fine.
is more about, we're going into society now. We'll come back to scenarios when
Mm-hmm.
Salome comes. A lot of stigma around neurodivergent being called naughty or disruptive.
Mm-hmm.
How do you suggest that parents should handle such stigma?
This one I wrote down, so excuse me while I look down at my notes. So I've put there is a need to train people, so parents, peers, educators, on neurodivergence, such as autism, dyslexia, etc., including how behaviours stem from unmet needs, sensory sensitivities, or different ways of processing information, which is not defiance. Um, we need to use language to reframe behaviours. So instead of disruptive behaviours, we might use seeking regulation. And when we went to the SEN conference, there was a lot at the end to do with strength-based language, which is similar to that and is something I also want to work on. It's thinking about what labels we place on the children and actually how we can reframe that in a positive way. We can easily say someone has disruptive behaviors, but if you express it as seeking regulation, you can see it's a better way to express what the child is going through. Um, so we need to share real life experiences. So also when we went to the conference, I loved hearing that, the testimonies from the parents. So it's really about going to these events, and hearing, what life is like for the children, what life is like for the parents. Um, there is a BBC program, it's called Inside Our Minds. So I'll put that on the chat. And that's been something I have posted on my social media, because I watched that and it has, I think the presenter has autism and ADHD. And he wanted to get the story of these people out. There's a male and a female adult in each category. And basically, by the end, after they explain what life is like for them and how they hide it from people around them, they're trying to get the message across to their loved ones. So what they do is they put that into a video with the help of the production team from the BBC, and it almost brought me to tears. In fact, one really did. It just highlights from their perspective what life is like for them, and I think it was a real eye-opener to start to help people understand what life is like and how brains are wired differently. And like Salome said at one point, even something as simple as giving someone 10 seconds just to process what you need to say. I can remember when I first got into working with children with SEND, I'd say the name and the instruction, I'd say the name and the instruction again. I'm thinking, why are they not responding? And they're just looking at me with a blank face. What can I do to help this child? And when someone told me about it was my line manager, told me about the 10-second rule, I put it into place and I was like, oh, yes, okay, I see. It's so effective, simple and effective. So it's about sharing these tips definitely with others. Um, and again, finding ways of supporting families, again, like through these
Yeah.
platforms. So I'll put those things
Yeah,
on the
on the chat.
chat
Thank you so much
inside
for
our
that.
minds.
Welcome back, Salome. So we'll just go into the last few questions. Feel free if there's any other question, just put in the chat. I mean, we had the opportunity to answer some of the questions that came in the chat, Salome. So we'll go back to the scenario questions because these are like direct experiences from people in the community who, for some reason, have not been able to join. But anyhow, um, the good thing is we have some questions, and the other person that has joined has also, I'm sure these are things that are burning in her heart. So the first scenario will go to Salome, then we now have Amanda. So the first scenario is, we have, what can a parent or schools do to manage a behavior in a child? For instance, the first child who has a limited speech, and that child bites and hits others, or even himself or herself. What can we do to support such a child? So Salome first.
All right, thank you very much for having me back. In most cases, when children bite, is there's always a reason for that. It could be as a result of one issue or the other. And most times I recommend giving them maybe a chewy tool, maybe like some chewy tool that are really available at the market or and so on. And then we teach them how to use it anytime there's a need for biting, where they feel the sense for biting, and then they just pick it up and chew. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead. We can.
Okay. Yes, and then most times I also teach children how to introduce, I also teach parents how to introduce the I need a break communication card with them, you know, because most times that's either the use of pegs or AAC. But then here in Nigeria, we don't really use AAC. We use the low tech AAC. So that's the use of cards or maybe flashcards that we create. Sometimes we have to create everything all by ourselves. So it's way easier when you have what you want to do, what you want to achieve with the child, and then you create it all by yourself. So we could teach the child how to use the I need a break card. And then another is we give pre-warning transitions. So in most cases, if there's a need for we to move from one activity to another, because when you get a child do that, is like I said, it's because of one thing or the other, either a sensory overload or it's because maybe the child doesn't understand what is happening, and then as a result of maybe emotional safety or something. So once you're able to introduce the pre-warning transition to the child, okay, we have 5 more minutes to go back into the class. We have 3 more minutes to go back into the class. Okay, we have 1 more minute to go back into the class, or maybe to go to the car, or we leave for this occasion or something. And then when is the 1 minute? I know that is a bit too much for parents most times, but sometimes we just have to tell parents to just create the time. And then when it's like a minute or 30 seconds, you can decide to say, okay, let's count to 10 before we go into the car. And then, but sometimes when you're in chaos and you're trying to rush, it's a bit difficult for you to be able to achieve that. But then when you're able to give all of those warnings, it's way helpful, and then it helps to avoid all of that. But then in some scenarios or in some cases, consequences is another thing. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead. We can hear you.
Yes. So consequences is another thing. So you need to look for a consequence for such behaviors, and then with time the child would stop. But then before you give the child consequences, you are supposed to teach the child like a replacement behavior. So that is why I brought up the we provide chewy tools to the child now. So you providing that chewy tools and teaching the child how to use it instead of biting
Yeah. Okay. We have lost you again.
providing replacement behavior in case of things like that instead of using chew. Can you hear
That's,
me?
yes, we can hear you. Yeah,
Okay, sorry about that.
that's
I think
okay.
I have a very, very bad network because it's raining. Yeah. So,
Oh, okay.
so if the child at the end of the day doesn't use the chewer and decides to bite an individual, you give them the consequences, because that is when your consequences is valid, because you have been able to teach them a replacement behavior for that behavior, or for the behavior of biting.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that word consequence because in my house, my first son, he is a bit more advanced in his communication. So we used to use the word punish, with my Nigerian background. Then he reminded me that we are not allowed to punish. So we use the word consequence, so I really like that word consequence. And my second son, who is the one that has some challenge, complex behavior, I don't like the word challenge, the complex behavior, I like that consequence is actually helping, because we tell him, if you do this, in a way he will understand. Do this, you get this. So if you don't do this, you get this. And I think it's eventually, even though it's taking some time, he's eventually beginning to understand that, okay, this is what they mean. This is the consequence. If I throw the remote at somebody, mommy's going to take the remote for a while. Or if I hit my brother, they're going to withdraw something from me. So I really love that idea of consequence. Thank you, Salome. Those are really wonderful. We have a question in the chat. I think we'll go to that before we come back to Salome. So, Amanda, how can a child who has the behavior of peeling skin be stopped?
Hmm. So, I mean, I've never worked with a child that's peeling their skin, if I'm honest. They might pick their scabs. Um, Again, it's if it's a common thing, I would have to ask for some more input from a specialist, if I'm honest. That might be an OT, to make some recommendations. I haven't personally worked with children peeling skin, but just off the top of my head, things like what clothing are they wearing? Are there sensitivities? That would need to be looked at further, I think more specialist. Peeling skin. I mean, again, if it's something, even if it was headbutting or biting or anything, there's always distractions which can stop the child from focusing on that thing, that behavior. But I would definitely seek some further investigation, because that could be sensitivities, which actually could be avoided, whether it's clothing or cream that needs to go on. It depends what's causing that, or is it this child's skin isn't, okay, and just has this tendency to want to do that. So again, that this kind of picking motion, is there something with Play-Doh or clay that they can dig their nails into? Again, it's looking at the materials and the textures. What feedback is that child getting, and can it be replaced with a different material? Is the sort of mindset that I would go to, but I would definitely be speaking to someone like an occupational therapist for some more advice.
Thank you for that. Just respond in the chat if that answers your question. So the last scenario, we'll go back to Salome, is now we have a child who is well aware of what is appropriate, or we think he or she knows what is appropriate, but we sense that this child is copying. So in this scenario, a child copies inappropriate behavior, and when you ask them, they'll say it's because they see someone else doing it. So how do we address such a situation? Maybe a typical scenario can be that he sees it in school, the another child, is talking back at an adult or rocking the chair, and the person has been told not to do it, and another child is now copying, and they now tell you it's because this person was doing it. How do we address it?
All right. Okay. So, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Okay. Um, for me, I feel this particular scenario is a very simple one, because it's going to be a hard one if the child isn't aware that this is it and this is that, and then when you ask, of course there's going to be no response to why certain behaviors are being done or copied. But then when you ask a question just based on the scenario you just gave, and then the child tells you that he saw this, or this person did it, or if this person did it, then I feel it's okay kind of response. Then for me, I feel it's easier, because that's to say the child is supposed to know the difference between good and bad, but then because he sees another person do it, he feels is okay. But then one way we can address this is by um, creating like a behavioral role. It's very, very common in classrooms, you know. Most times when I train school teachers, I tell them that you need to create like a behavioral role, so that when your children see, when the people in the class see a behavior outside, they don't bring it inside to think it's okay.
Mm.
because they see someone hit them.
Oh, why is it raining now?
Somebody else
Good.
outside, they would come
Mm.
on do this and don't do that. One good
Mm.
thing for you to adopt as a parent. Should I say, let's call it. So did you get a hold of that? Did you get that?
We got to the tail end. You said that behavior
Oh
rules in the
no.
class. You talked about behavior rules.
Yes, creating behavior
Behavior
rules.
rules.
And then for some children, you can add visuals to it so that it's easier. And then another is for you to create like a body system, like a pair body
Mm.
system, more like a battery. I call it like the battery system, where you create like a positive and a negative. So the child who is well behaved, and then another child who exhibits like an inappropriate, or let's say an undesirable behavior, you pair them together so that the child who behaves desirably always cautions the one who exhibits an undesired behavior. That's another way. And then for parents, I know they do that a lot. You see that you find out that maybe even if it's the older one who has a special need, or who has an inappropriate behavior, they would want to like pair, just put an eye on your brother for me, so that is it. And then another thing most parents fail to do is always reinforce good behavior. Once you're able to reinforce an appropriate behavior or a desired behavior, then that will tell, oh, okay, I I know that I did something good, and that was why I was being rewarded for this, or reinforced, or this behavior was being reinforced. So you can look for anything locally in your environment to try as much as possible to reinforce appropriate behaviors.
Mm.
And then, like I said earlier, try as much as possible to have consequences for inappropriate behaviors. Because if a child says, because this person did this and this I feel is okay, then that's to say that you would definitely explain. Yes, the use of social story can also do, or role play as well. You can
Mm-hmm.
decide to use role play to teach the child that no, it's not. But then using the behavior charts or the behavior, do this and that chart would do more, would be able to reduce on undesired.
I love that positive reinforcement because I think that for many of our children, especially when I think of children on the spectrum, they like a reward system. Like they love praises, they thrive on praises. So I like that idea of positive reinforcement. Thank you. Just in the last few minutes, Amanda, do you have anything to add before we do the 1 minute wrap up?
So definitely agree with all of what Salome said. In schools, sometimes we do divide and conquer, which means sometimes it's as simple as knowing who triggers who in the classroom and separating them to an extent. It's not keeping them away forever, but it's, who works well with who's going to trigger who. Okay, they're going to work with this adult there. So it's which groupings you put so as a classroom strategy. And then also talking to parents, because I've had, for example, a child who just, innocently doing boisterous, wrestling tumble sort of play with his dad and his brothers, and then brought that into the school context and thought it was okay to sort of jump on the children and roll over the children and thought it was really funny, and I just had to have a word with the parents and say, your child is doing this. Do could you tell me a little bit more about where that might have come from? And instantly, it's rough and tumble play with daddy time. And I said, well, this child actually doesn't have the understanding to say that that's okay at home, but that's not okay at school. And so the parents made the decision to just tone it down a bit until the child understood. And again, you'd use symbols like home, that sort of play, whatever you want to call it. And then at school, we're not going to do this at school, but we can do it at home. So you can use visuals. So sometimes it's as simple as having the word with the parent who can also help, and definitely positive reinforcement.
I love that. Thank you so much. I mean, both of you have just been, this has just been a remarkable, remarkable time. I'm happy that I remember to record it because I'm sure a lot of people will be beating themselves up. The sun is out here in the UK, so maybe that has made a lot of people forget because we've been we've been looking at this. So final word to start from Salome. As you know, Traveling Beyond the Label is a community for parents raising children with neurodivergent, that are neurodivergent. A lot of our children are on the autism spectrum. So what advice will you give to us as parents who are navigating this unique, let me not use another word, unique style of parenting, what advice will you give to us on our respective journeys? Because as you understand, it can be a lot. What advice will you give to us? So we'll start with Salome, then we'll hand over to Amanda.
Okay, to be honest, I wouldn't say much because for me, I know um, how draining it can be. So most times when I'm being asked questions like this, I just go straight to the point and tell parents that they should care about themselves. Because the truth is, you cannot run on an empty cup, like from an empty cup. You need to find time for your children, but then at the same time, you need to find time for yourself. You shouldn't be someone who would walk through the day trying to find answers and then go to your bed at night and sob and cry. It's not easy, but to be honest, I feel if you're able to take care of your own mental health, if you're able to answer certain questions, if you're able to, thank God for the Thriving Beyond. It's a community that answers a lot of questions to parents. This is one thing I always preach: find a community that you fit in, because if you don't have people who can answer your questions, then it's going to be a lot for you as a parent. So you need to move from being overwhelmed to being empowered. Yes, that's all I can
That
say.
is the summary of my life in the past since I owned my parenting journey, from being transitioning from acting helpless to finding information, and now, coming together to raise this community. I would say that the quality of my life has improved. So that is very, very sound advice, you have given Salome. Thank you so much. Amanda, what advice will you give to us?
I mean, actually, when you first asked that question, the first thing that came to my mind was be kind to yourself, which actually Salome said. It's we recognize how difficult it can be in our setting or sphere of influence, and just from what parents say. In terms of a school setting, we do encourage the parents to reach out to the family support worker, because the family support worker can give advice on other networks which are there to support families in whatever way they feel they need support. There is always support, whether that's counselling, whether that's SEN family groups. That's what the family support worker is there to do. So definitely signposting there. Definitely, as Salome said as well, connecting through meeting parents or coming to these events that you've done today. Because there's nothing worse than feeling isolated. There's nothing worse than feeling like you don't have someone to talk to. And it's really important that your voice is heard as well, because you're not only just carrying maybe the frustration of even understanding what needs your child might have, because that's what was expressed at the SEN conference, where one parent actually said it took her a very long time to come to acceptance that her child had autism, and was just sort of pushing it aside, like I can't see any of these behaviors right now, so my child is nothing wrong with my child. And then she explained that after about a year a lot of the behavioral traits that they say with autism presented in her child, and it was like, oh, and then it was like, oh, what do I do now? So just coming to those groups, community, knowing that you're not alone is so, so important, and recognize that all what you do, you can only use the tools that you've got so far, so not to be harsh and hard on yourself, because you're on the journey. If you've made it and you've watched this, well done.
I mean, both of you, it's as if both of you were just copying each other's notes. I really want to thank you for taking the time. I mean, this is stellar advice. And I'm not just trying to big you up. This is good advice, well-rounded, built on not just research but from your experience. And I thank you on behalf of my community. I have a feeling we might have to bring you back, oh, because by the time they watch this video, I have a feeling we might have to bring you back. So just have an open mind. But thank you for all you have done this evening and enjoy the rest of your day. I'm going to reach out to you in the next few minutes. Thank you, everyone. It will be available on YouTube on our Thriving Beyond the Label channel, and we are going to publish it on social media because the attendance was not as we expected. So expect loads of questions, follow-up questions, and maybe we'll bring you back. Until next time, thank you so much. Bye bye for now.
Thank you for watching. Follow us on all available social media channels.